Randy, you gonna sit there?
No, I'm gonna sit here. Lincoln sit there, or you can sit there. Yeah, Kate and Glenn yet.
Yeah, the soldiers.
And also,
That's much
you know, you on the state good, you need rulers, you know.
That's right, yeah.
The other format that we had lines. Exactly.
Yeah, I can put the lines on there. I didn't want to, the copier smear, like when you put lines on it, the copier is smearing it, so I just took them off. But I'll try to work on that.
I didn't know whether it was a new software or. Well, anyway, a format like this. You know,
Did anybody
You've
want
got
coffee?
everybody
There's
together,
the
you know.
Keurigs back there. You can make yourself a cup of coffee.
That might be a good idea. I had 2 cups already. I'm gonna sit here
Let's slip one down.
in the middle.
Okay.
And of course, there's drinks in the fridge also.
A few minutes yet.
Hey, can you log on for me to the YouTube channel and make sure you can not only see the video, but hear as well? I just wanted to make sure that's working. All right, thank you. You can just call me.
Yeah. I'll sit over there.
Okay.
Software, will we continue to get our packets for
Randy,
agendas?
What is?
Okay.
It'll be in paper.
Okay.
Okay.
Unless you
I didn't
want
know
it
whether everything was gonna be
electronically.
online.
We can do that too, if that's what you prefer.
I like the paper.
Okay.
You can make notes, you know, you underline.
Yeah.
Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
Good. We've got coffee and a few snacks in the back if you would like some.
Coffee is a good thing. Now that looks like that belongs to somebody. Let's go.
pass them on.
Oh, okay. Okay. I wanted trying to get us to buy a pen.
Yeah,
Conferences, and you pick up all kinds of pens.
Yeah. And some work and some
I
don't.
got more pins, you said stick it in there.
Some are better.
Yeah.
So you have that one printout of
Richard,
You're telling, huh?
Richard's awesome.
Well, this one I kind of like.
Well, there's
Good morning.
a simpler one. Not the,
All right. Okay. I'm getting it.
I'll describe it to you.
Yeah.
Other than,
I used to, when I was working, I used to get them
I
all
think
the
it
time.
starts with.
Promotional with the name on them.
Yeah, just the
And rarely ever ordered any.
I got them, I got pins everywhere.
So it starts out,
And then when I get ready for one,
position number, one column, class, date of hire, position holder, current salary.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is. This
Okay,
is
there's
your
some
document.
coffee
Can you
and
bring an
snacks.
updated one over?
Yes, thank you.
That was one thing I was thinking this morning. I should have requested coffee.
Oh.
Yep, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, thank you.
Oh, you go.
Bye. Yeah, yeah. Your hours.
Sam,
That is it. I might not reconnect my connection to it.
Sam, I was going to show you this spreadsheet.
Oh, yeah. That's a,
This is old, but it's very concise. I mean, you know,
Debt service
you can see it
requirements.
right in one. You remember? the-
Origination, lender, original amount.
I mean, that way you see everything in one.
Okay, so basically a summary.
Yeah.
yeah, I can do that.
Larry, do you remember these?
I might need to call,
this is confusing.
I
Mhm.
might need to call BC.
I can't figure out what's what.
Exactly.
Hey, Larry.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, guys.
Is that you?
I didn't touch it. Part F, we're considering that. I think I told you. Our asset inventory assessment tax. We didn't get it yet. I see you guys got like 3 or 4 of them. I think you did yours too. I got the list that's in the.
I don't turn off notifications so that my email
smaller.
popping up all over the place. You know how to do it?
Yeah. And then Sam and I noticed that several of the county systems are the distress list. Yeah, that's the good part. You're eligible for funding.
Right.
I mean, bad, but good.
Yes, opportunity.
Larry, no coffee, no water, anything?
I just had breakfast. I'm good.
Daniel and Jim, there's refreshments back there if you guys want a bottle of water or. Okay. Good right now. Go ahead yourself. Daniel, before you speak, maybe we should give everybody an anxiety pill. Hopefully it won't be that bad. I don't know. Rocky Mount got hit this last year with ransom. I don't think they paid it, but man, it took them a good month to get that. The police, from what I
So what we
hear.
could do is we just say the,
Still
They
struggling.
didn't pay it, but they paid for
I
it.
moved
Yeah, they
back.
paid for it, all
They
right.
paid for it.
I didn't say anything.
But that's my stuff.
That's your stuff. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Is it Lean? Oh, that's Lean's right there. That's just-
So you had your coat there, so Lynn, move your stuff back, I think.
Okay, fine. I'll move back over here.
That's what I can move right.
No, I am fine. I am fine.
You need to be at the head.
I'm the head, not the tail.
That's right. Let me be the tail. Plus I get to get the table. My ankles all day. Anyway. And I do want to get those books from you sometime. I'm sorry I haven't called you.
That's fine.
She's going today. They're drawing fluid off her lung.
Well, listen. I wish I could talk to her. She just can't say one thing about me.
Larry, have you got your shot
Stand on
yet?
that word.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I've been
I'm past my 2 weeks.
How'd you
and
do
all
your
I do
second
is
one?
stand on that word.
Okay.
My arm
I'll
was a little bit
tell her.
tender. I caught 2.
But I've got to go home. I'll take my
Yeah.
dogs to visit my neighbor
Neighbor.
at lunch because it's going to be pretty.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll pick them up there.
Louise, how
Okay.
did you do with your second shot? Any chills or fever?
Woke myself up shaking in the bed,
Did you?
but I got up, walked to the kitchen, walked back, got back in the bed, covered up. That's fine.
I think the governor said included in round 3 or phase 3 are government employees.
Yeah.
Sarah, I think you got your first one already.
I did get my first one.
You
I wanted to wait as
Yeah,
long as
I've
I
had both mine.
had both yours?
Mhm.
I think I'm just gonna wait for national.
Nah,
to call me and see what
on the end of the
happens if I
line.
ever get called.
What?
Yeah, right.
No.
You the youngin'?
She's young.
She's a youngin'. Maybe. It is.
I'd like to call our special call agenda, our special call meeting. This is our agenda of the town council to order. This is a budget session, so I will now call it to order. And I will turn it over to Randy.
Sure. Well, to begin with, we got a few things. We'd asked Patsy McGee with Nash County to come and give us an update on grant funding that she knows of and is aware of. When she's finished, then we have Daniel with PC3 to give us an update on cybersecurity and our IT that we have going on. And then I think we're ready to get into what's in the packet. So Patsy with, what's that? Oh, yeah, the auditor, I forgot. The auditor will be after Dan.
So I don't have a PowerPoint. I wanted to talk with y'all a little bit. We just got back from a trip yesterday. So I'm Patsy King McGee. I know many of you. I've been working in local government in North Carolina for 30 years, full time. I have a couple of, internships before that. I worked in Jacksonville, Roanoke Rapids, the Upper Coastal Plain Council of Governments, and then I've been with Nash County for 18 years on April 1st. I have a master's in city and regional planning from UNC, and I went to undergraduate at Barton, which was Atlantic Christian, like Lynn at the time. Grants, I've been working with for most of my career. Local governments have a love-hate relationship with grants, but they certainly can be used to improve economic development and quality of life for citizens and businesses. People have different feelings about grants. Federal and state grants, they feel like their tax money perhaps shouldn't be used for that or should be used in a different way for that. But the way that I approach it is that we send our money to the state and to the federal government, and the more that we can bring back here for things that we want to do, then the better off we are. At Nash County and other places that I've worked mostly with federal and state and some nonprofit grants. And grants aren't just so simple as writing an application. There's what you might call a grant life cycle. There's the pre-award phase, the award phase, and the post-award phase. So you need to be prepared for all of those. The pre-award phase, there's funding opportunity announcements. Who is eligible to apply? What are the requirements? What was the reason behind it becoming available? Are there workshops that you should be sending staff to learn about these grants? Do you need to register to apply? Like with some federal grants, you need to register in order to apply, and some of that can be kind of a little bit time consuming and not as easy as you would think. Do you need any qualifications to be able to apply? I encourage you to review the application as soon as it's made available and develop a timeline of things that need to be done, like list out what needs to be done and what kind of order it might be done in. For instance, with Part F, public meetings are required, and you need a site-specific plan for the park that you want to develop. And so you're going to need to engage an engineer or architect to prepare that plan. So you probably need a 6-month time frame to at least to really do a good job and get the points that you need in order to successfully be awarded a grant. Let's see. You need a good engineer to prepare a budget, and I like to use engineers or architects who are experienced with a particular type of grant that we're pursuing, if possible, because they're familiar with the nuances of what can be included in the budget or what cannot. If you need letters of support, you need to line that up, think about who would be good. If it's a federal grant, maybe a congressman to support it, and that takes a little time to get that. like with part of also, you need newspaper articles about your planned project, but not just any newspaper articles. Most people must be speaking favorably about your project. So you just kind of have to make sure you have the meetings and have the articles that you need to include to get the points. A lot of grant applications, you need to identify the roles and the specific names and titles of the people who are going to be involved in the administration of the grant. And as you move through, if you're awarded the grant, as those change, you have to make the agency aware. Our finance director left and took another job, or retired, and so now we have a new one. Because they hold people responsible for certain things. The award phase, you get an award letter, that's great. And you might get conditions that have to be met, particularly with federal grants like CDBG grants. So it might be 6 months before you can begin really implementing the grant, because you have to procure for project administration, procure for engineering, adopt a bunch of plans and policies that are specific to this project. And then finally, you can get to the actual implementation of what you wanted to do. Some of the plans and policies might include like non-discrimination forms, conflict of interest policies, fair housing. And that's something that if you have a federal grant, you have to do fair housing activities every quarter. So somebody needs to be keeping up with that, making sure that you do them, because when you're monitored, that is something they will check on most likely. And being within an hour's distance of the Raleigh-Durham Airport makes it very easy for the federal government to fly in and come monitor our project and get back out the same day or the next day. So we've been the subject of several federal civil rights monitoring, or just regular project budget, project monitoring, like with the USDA. The grant agreement will have a certain timeline, and you need to be mindful of that timeline as you move through the project. It's easy for things to get behind. You need to keep the people informed. Your project, you'll have a project contact, a project administrator from the agency. And with the budget, you need to be aware of the match requirements. Do you have a 50% match? Can you, if you find out there's other funding available too for the same project, can you supplant the funds or not? Or are you going to be required to maintain that local match? There's also reporting requirements. Every local government has their own reporting requirements normally, but with each grant, you're going to have quarterly, semi-annual, annual, some kind of reporting time frame. And you'll also have drawdowns, reimbursements perhaps. Most grants nowadays are reimbursements. Some you can get the funds up front if you need them and you qualify. The post-award phase. The program officer will review your reports that you submit, will conduct site visits. Sometimes now those are not in person. You have to take video and send it up due to COVID. But just communicate proactively with your program officer so that y'all can stay on the same page. The reporting, they'll not only be looking at, are you on schedule and are you in budget, but are you doing the specific things you said you were going to do? And if not, why? And that may or may not be an issue with the agency, but you just need to work it out. Audit requirements, there's often audit requirements with grants. Sometimes single audits are required. You just need to be aware of that. That'll be in your grant agreement. So it's important that the grant agreement is circulated to the people who are, all the people who are going to be working on the project so that they all have the opportunity to learn what they need to be doing. And I'll just mention with a lot of our projects, we have monthly or every 2-month meetings about our projects, just to get together our team that's responsible for that project and talk about anything. And sometimes issues come up that, you know, somebody wants to change something and maybe there's a grant requirement, you can't really do that. And you get to discuss them and sort of work it out. With the closeouts, there's more reports and monitoring and site visits. And for instance, just recently, I had a monitoring on a project that had been closed for 9 years. So, by the federal government. So it's important to keep the records.
Did you even remember you had that one?
I did.
9 years.
It was Middlesex Elementary School building. So, you know, it's important to keep those documents because things aren't going to be fresh in your mind. You need to sit down with them before you're monitoring, sort of remind yourself and be ready when they come in. Application deadlines, I want to speak to that because some of them have a rolling deadline. Some of them it's once a year, twice a year. So if you have an idea of something that you might want to do, like build a park, you need to be aware of when the PARTIF and LWCF deadlines are now. PARTIF is a state grant and Land and Water Conservation Fund is a federal grant that runs through the state. So it's actually the same agency. And then there are special opportunities that arise. And if you plan, if you like have a CIP or you're consistently planning certain economic development projects, for instance, then when a hurricane comes along and it's devastating to the economy of your area and you get a presidential declaration, then you're then eligible for funding that and would receive priority, for instance, from the Federal Economic Development Administration. I know Lynn's aware that we worked with the Universal Leaf Project and we got EDA funds for water and sewer, as well as North Carolina Commerce and Golden Leaf funds, I believe, for that project. It was a partnership between the town and the county. So just being ready to move forward with the project. And also, I think we did the water tank at the industrial park and the road with the EDA project because the prison, I believe, had to be shut down because it didn't have water for several days after Hurricane Floyd. And so it was an opportunity to move forward with the project the town wanted to do, utilizing that disaster funding. I think it's important you maintain relationships with the funding agencies. Sometimes when you go to conferences, they'll have funding fairs with different agencies represented. And the World Center used to do this. I know the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency does it now, and I'm sure some others do. And you know the projects that the town is thinking about doing. And just walk around and talk with different funders and, you know, they can say, oh, yes, that's something that we could do, or no, we can't do it because it's so-and-so, and then, you know, not to waste your efforts there anymore for that particular project. But also just picking up the phone and calling them. I mean, it's hard sometimes to get with the state people now because of COVID and they're working remotely, but most agencies have worked out their systems now where you can still access, and websites have improved, I think, as a result of COVID. So you can get more information there. Regarding infrastructure, which Randy asked me to talk about, I'm sure you're aware of USDA. That's mostly loan through their program. Sometimes it's 0% though. And sometimes it's very low interest loans for 40 years. So sometimes there's a benefit to pursuing them. And then sometimes they will have a grant component to them, like the loans first, but you may qualify for a grant as well. George Vitale and Henderson would be your contact on that. EDA, you would work with the Upper Coastal Plain Council of Governments, Ben Farmer. EDA has been very good to this area over the last 20 years or so. And Hillary Sherman is now the EDR, and she's good. You can use those typically on public water, sewer, road, mostly water sewer type projects. But it must be publicly owned. Now you can get into some nuances with things like that. For one project that I worked on with EDA, we made there was a process, food processing plant. So we were able to make the, I forget what it's called, with the sewer that they have to pre-treat it before it goes. And we made that public. And therefore it could qualify for the funding. So that was publicly owned. That was in Rocky Mount. Community Development Block Grant, there are lots of opportunities to use those funds. They're federal funds, and they're useful for economic development projects, housing projects, perhaps like we have one in Nash County right now. The street was in horrible condition. And the houses weren't in that great of a condition either. And it was a dirt street. So we are paving it, putting in stormwater improvements, and actually rehabbing a couple of the houses and replacing a couple of houses. And there was no local match required, but sometimes when you put in a little bit of a local match, you get a few more points. And so we put in $5,000 for a $750,000 grant and sweetened the pot and got a few extra points. Did it make a difference? Who knows? Who knows where we were on the bubble?
Where is that taking place, Patsy?
That is on Peel Drive down near Bailey, out in the county. There's only about 15 houses that are on that street, and then on Winter Road, I think it is out there. And usually you can't get funding for stormwater improvements, and drainage was a big concern of that neighborhood. But if you mix it with the road project and then the housing for the CDBG NR Neighborhood Revitalization Program, you have to have a housing component.
Yeah.
So, you know, we could do all of that there.
In an LMI clientele,
I'm sorry?
an LMI clientele, low to
Yeah.
moderate income.
Yeah, it has to be low to moderate income for something like that. So you do surveys, your consultant does the surveys to determine that. Here's a nice one. Golden Leaf located in Rocky Mount is a nonprofit that's local that honestly, in the beginning, we had a little bit of a hard time getting awards from Golden Leaf. But over time, their programs changed a little bit, and now we're very successful in acquiring Golden Leaf funds. That's an example of a funding that you could use to do your preliminary reports that were necessary for an economic development project so that you were ready to go with bricks and mortar type funding later on. We've also, they've loosened their rules a little bit. We're able to get some water and sewer funding through Golden Leaf sometimes now. NC Commerce, they have economic public infrastructure funding. They have building reuse funding, demolition funding, job retention funding, and coronavirus funding, and I'm sure some more. Melody Adams is a good contact in rural economic development. And in fact, the county applied for a CDBG CV grant. We were awarded $900,000, and part of that will include Wi-Fi zones, and these agreements have to be worked out. But at the Boys and Girls Club here in Nashville, at Glover Park, at Nash Central Middle School, and hand washing stations at some of the same locations. And why in those areas versus other areas? Because these were qualifying census tracts. So we had to work with the census tracts across the county where we could do things. And so once we get through our 6 months of paperwork and get a consultant in place, which we're about halfway through that now, we'll be contacting you to try to work out agreements to have free Wi-Fi and hand washing stations at some of these locations that'll be paid for with grant funds. Housing, we have worked with the Housing Finance Agency as well as on CDBG projects. And we usually work with your planning director. And when the county has programs, we will notify everybody who's come in and filled out a housing assistance request with us, but we will also notify all the municipalities. And Nashville's been good about getting the information out to people who have come into town hall about these kind of things. And we've done a number of urgent repair and essential single-family rehab projects for people, low to moderate income people in Nashville and around Nashville, including like Indian Trail, for instance. And you are also eligible to apply for URP funds or ESFR funds, but well, not ESFR, that's counties, but URP funds you could apply for. I know Rocky Mount does occasionally. And they're an entitlement city, so they're not always eligible to apply for the same things you are because they are already getting a lot of federal funding like community development block grant funding. But they can apply for these funds and so can you. But we do at Nash County, and we serve Nashville as well as other areas. Michael Hanley is the contact there. I mentioned community development block grant several times. Dennis Branch would be your contact, probably there. And for Parks and Recreation, your RRS consultant is Jennifer Beadle Mundley, and she's been there for several years now. And I don't know if she worked on Glover Park. I don't think she was here yet then. But if you're moving forward with another application, it's good to talk with her up front and develop a relationship. She will be the one who advocates for your project at the funding meeting with the board, the part of the board, and they do LWCF grants too. And I will mention with those type grants, there usually is a significant match requirement. So it's good that you have some general fund, some balance set aside for capital projects if you're going to be involved with those. Let's see. Some other things we've done that Andy might be interested in is Governor's Crime Commission grants for the police department.
We just submitted one of those.
Yes. So
Captain Winstead did.
and I don't do a lot of police grants, so it'd be good if your police chief had a great relationship with the sheriff's department and can learn, you know, what is available, as well as, you know, whatever kind of meetings. Now, sometimes they come out with very expensive training opportunities. I myself never participate in those. I just don't think it's worth spending several $1,000s to go learn about these grants when you can do it in another way. But different people work in different ways, and I think a lot of times when you go to different conferences and stuff, just going to the presentations about that kind of thing to develop your relationship and your understanding of it. Like I said, I would strongly recommend that if you do it in-house, that you provide the person who's working on it with enough time to do it. And you have a team approach, because the finance director is going to have a lot of information the Public Utilities Director is gonna know a lot of information. And when you get them all in the same room and talking, I think that's just a good approach where everybody learns and you can approach the project better. And I would recommend working with an experienced consultant who knows what they're doing with this particular type of funding so that you don't get surprises. They have experience with that. So some of the current projects we have between the county and town that I could just think of real quick. The Elm Street Drainage Project, that's 100% grant funded as a result of Golden Leaf Disaster Recovery and CDBG Disaster Recovery.
Is that on budget?
Right now, it's on budget. It's behind schedule. It's a problem with the state, and the NCOR funding is vastly behind schedule. But as far as the construction schedule with Barn Hill, we're on schedule, even with the rain. So we're within budget so far. There have been a lot of utility. We haven't had to relocate a lot yet, but there have been quite a few utilities that are in the right of way. We'll just put it that way. But I think we're gonna be okay. We've got an experienced contractor on that project, so.
There's a lot of stuff to dig around.
Right, yes. And just trying to, with the jail project, not do something now that would not be beneficial when that project comes to fruition soon. So we're just trying to, with the utilities being in the way, we're having to redesign some things, maybe with the jail with the kind of thing. But we're in budget. I told you about the housing. I forgot to tell you, there's also a disaster recovery housing project, ESF. And we're doing that all over the county except, well, that one's in Rocky Mount as well. So Nashville would be included, obviously. Told you about the CB grant. We have just recently been awarded an abandoned manufactured home grant. We've not yet gotten to the point of implementation. So if there are abandoned mobile homes in Nashville's jurisdiction, you can make us aware of that. And we can make the homeowner aware or the property owner aware and see if they would like to participate. If the cost of demolition and disposal exceeds what the grant covers, they have to agree to cover that extra cost. So, but they would be bid out, and so we would know what that would cost. High-speed internet. So I know most people in Nashville have service either with CenturyLink or Suddenlink, but as an option, CloudWise could be another option for people in Nashville.
How far have we gotten so far with CloudWise?
We have
CloudWise.
100 residential customers so far and about 3 commercial customers so far. I'll be honest, that company has been behind. They were a small company. Now they have not only Nash County, but several other counties. They've been awarded great grants from the State Broadband Infrastructure Office. And they have definitely had some growing pains in just getting a number of people on the ground to implement the project. But for instance, that we have one team full-time of 2 individuals, but they're getting another van and another 2 individuals up here within the next month or so.
Where are they
So-
headquartered, Vance?
I'm sorry,
Where are they headquartered?
they're in Wilmington.
Wilmington.
They were the best, least expensive choice of the 4 we had. They were the one the commissioners felt had the most confidence in. I mean, vastly different prices from different companies, but they're a young firm, mostly young technological people. And they're relying on its wireless technology. And so yeah, it's coming along behind schedule.
So you
But,
point,
you know, I'm always the one in the meetings. I say, are we on schedule? Are we in? That's what I'm always asking.
so your point of contact will be in Wilmington?
Sean Olson, they have a website and we encourage people to, there's a link on our website if people want to sign up because they might be interested in service. You just, or you call. And I found if you call, you get better response. And I have taught with them quite a bit about customer service because I don't think that's an area they're strong in and at all. And, you know, like I said, they're developing, but
So that's going to be key.
right.
And I
it hasn't
reference,
been good.
reference CenturyLink and SuddenLink for customer service.
Yeah. And I think they know that. And the people who actually have service are well pleased.
Mhm.
It's getting to that point where when you sign up, you actually hear back from them. And then, you know, and I'm speaking frankly, but you know, they're getting there. And I now CC the CEO every time I get a customer complaint and stuff so that he's fully aware of everything that's transpiring so that they can develop. I mean, we have a great investment with them and we want them to be successful and want to help them get there. And I will mention too, what else was I going to say? Parks and Recreation, I know Randy and I talked about this. Nash County has a Parks and Recreation plan. It's done every 10 years, and that is so that we can qualify for part of an LWCF funding. And it is possible, I'm not sure, I didn't talk with the Parks and Rec director, but it's possible, like other municipalities have, that you could rely on that for your overall plan and get points for that. So you will have to have a site-specific development plan, which is more like a site plan. And but it's possible you wouldn't have to do the overall plan. I'm not saying you don't want to, maybe you do want to have your own 10-year plan. But you know, if you're in a time crunch or if you just want to rely on the county's plan, which may or may not need amending to include an additional project, but it can be amended. We did so with the Miracle Park at Coopers was not a part of Nash County's original plan, but the commissioners added it, and it essentially replaced what our regional park was going to be at the reservoir, and now it's open. So, we ended up using quite a bit of grant funding. Do y'all have any questions? I've gone about my time limit.
How are you seeing the funding availability? How has it been progressed over the years past? Is it,
Over the years,
are we seeing less grant funds available than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Are they about the same?
I don't think so. I think for economic development purposes and for low to moderate income benefit projects, that the funding is fairly stable.
Good to hear.
That fluctuates. EDA, for example, was always on the bubble of not being funded every year. And I forget what you call it, but now they're in the budget. They're there every year. That's a more stable source. I think when I have seen maybe is when times were good, a lot of local governments didn't want to spend the time and effort that it took to apply for and implement a grant. It was more trouble than it's worth. But when times are bad and you don't have as much funding, then more people would, more local governments would tend to apply. I do think now that a lot of local governments don't have the matching funds and they're not pursuing grants because that require a match because they're very uncertain of their future. And if they don't have a good fund balance, then they're not confident in moving forward, you know, with a project. So.
Are there any specific conferences in the state, just for the purpose of going to learn what grants might be available on an annual basis, or is it just?
It's kind of hard, I think. I don't think there is. I would encourage the county commissioners, or well, in your case, the League of Municipalities. I'm not sure what they provide at the annual meetings, but all these kinds of organizations should be encouraged to have a tract on funding. I know planning organization usually has at least a workshop on funding. I know the Parks and Recreation will have at least a workshop on funding.
Yeah.
And I would encourage your employees, when they go to these workshops, go to a conference, to attend that workshop, but there's no overall sort of way to learn. Just get in there and do it.
Good.
And Lynn, I know probably a lot of you, Randy as well, she's had a lot of experience. So as you move forward with the project, she would know a lot of the questions to ask her, things to watch out for. One of the key ones up front is the match and what kind of requirements are there. And like Golden Leaf, when you apply for Golden Leaf funds, if you put down that the town is going to provide $500,000 and Golden Leaf does whatever they do, you're going to have to provide that $500,000.
Yeah.
So, you don't want to, with your budgets, you really don't want to overshoot and you don't want to undershoot. You want to have an engineer who will give you a
Good
very
numbers.
good estimate
Mhm.
of what the actual cost, which is hard because sometimes it's a year or
And it
9
doubles.
months before the project's funded, and prices in pipe can change and
Don't we know?
Yes, we do.
so,
Well, that happened with us with the sewer outfall line. It was almost 600,000 over budget.
and some agencies like USDA can sort of work with that, and some other ones will say, well, mainly because they're partially loan, but, and some, you always go back to your funding source and say, look, we've got this overrun. Can y'all do any more? We need to do. And the agencies like to loan out and grant out their money because it makes them look good. And if you can make them look good, you'll be much more successful.
Excellent.
I've had, when Lynn was at the county, I had USDA contact me. They had X amount of money in the, I think it was an RBEG, and in a small 75,000, I think, pot that they hadn't used that year, and just wanted to know if we had a project. And I said, well, we've got to overrun on this one project, and we really need some more money for that project. And we had 2 USDA RBEGs on the same project. I think one was water, one was sewer, so they could separate it and make it different, something like that. But just, if you have things you want to do, just start contacting the agencies, putting together a plan, figuring it out, and town should be prepared to put in local money, because I think that is one change I've seen. The days of 100% grant funded projects, it's difficult now to do that. It used to be easier to do that. If you could do 3 or 4 different grants on the same project, but they don't allow that as much anymore. They require local input. Any more questions? I'm only a hop, skip, and a jump away, so
We know.
I don't know everything.
Thanks, Patsy.
I know things.
Thank
you so much, Patsy.
Appreciate it.
Patsy.
Have a great day.
You too.
Well, next we have Daniel at PC3. Daniel, if you want to sit here, you can go to the podium, whatever you like.
Hopefully I'll be able to do this now. My name is Daniel Jones, and I am the Town of Nashville's VCIO. Behind me is Jim Moore. He's the regional manager over all of North Carolina and Georgia. And actually, our region also covers Vermont and New Hampshire as well, and Southern Virginia. So we have lots of area that we cover. About a year ago, give or take a month, we were here to give you a presentation on what we're doing for you. A lot of that focus was heavily geared around security. And Sam had reached out and said, could I come back in and kind of put together an accomplishments of what we've done between that time to where we are now and where we're hoping to go in the future. So that's what this presentation is right now. The first couple of slides are slides you guys have seen before. We have a lot of relationships with the municipalities within the various states that we cover. 340 municipalities, 70 alone in North Carolina, and over 25 years, and we're growing all the time. There we go. And we are part of the league, North Carolina League as well. So the accomplishments we've had is just from that point in time where we were with just overall desktop support and services, we were able to complete the fiber connection between the town hall and police department buildings. So less reliance on individual connections to those buildings, individual equipment, being able to leverage the equipment in another building and run more off of that to help reduce costs. We had a need come up from a police for a specialized piece of software that they wanted to begin using for some of their undercover operations coming up. So they had a need for a brand new server. The software that was coming in was pretty beefy. It needed a lot of power to run it. We were able to take that advantage or that need and help out in regards to the rest of the servers. So we bought a new server for that particular purpose, but we got it large enough with enough power that also then replaced the existing police server and has the capacity sitting there ready to replace the town hall server as soon as we finish up with the financial application migration to the cloud. So like I said, for that need that came up, we were able to take care of an action item that we had previously on the age of the equipment for the servers that were in place at the time. So we kind of tied those together. We've also put in managed backups and disaster recovery for all three of those servers. So there are devices in place right now that are doing backups to the device and then backing up. They copy that up to the cloud. So right now, what we did was, even in the case of that server failing, it's not just a backup device. That device that is doing those backups has enough power that if that server were to crash, we can take that backup file and run it off that backup device. So we can literally spin that up within maybe an hour or two and have everything back up and running if that server were to fail. So these were things that were never in place before. So we've tried to, anywhere we could as we've gone along, we've tried to put you in a better position, improve the hardware that you have or the components that you have in place so that as things fail or as COVID hits us, you're less caught off guard. With that being said, even with our grand plan and direction that we had, COVID came along and kind of hit us kind of hard. So we pretty much switched from a traditional old style desktop sitting at a desk environment and had to quickly try to adapt to getting more laptops and more mobile workforce to allow people to work from home and give them the flexibility that they need. So between a combination of the things that we did and some, I believe, federal dollars that Sam was able to find, we were kind of made that switch in place. We've also taken the old email system and migrated it over to Office 365 and brought everyone over to Office 365 licenses. This is also an improvement because it's a user-based license. So how it's set up, depending on the internal policies, let's say Randy, for instance, he has a license. He can install that software on up to 5 computers, even home computers if he chooses. So he has the ability to have that Office suite on more devices in more areas to have him or assist him when he needs it the most. And of course, we put in a voice over IP phone system. Not doing well. You control your mouse a little bit better than I can? Yeah.
Here, I'll just do this. I'll make this useful.
Doesn't want to advance. You're straight to the end.
Right straight to the end. Or maybe it's just the response and I'm not giving her enough time. Thank you, sir. Basically, it's just kind of a generic slide deck, but the things that come as part of the overall service that you guys had purchased or gotten with us is a 24/7 simple point of contact for all IT issues, predictable fixed monthly support fees, includes an IT director services, proactive and reactive auto monitoring and alerting of the servers and the workstations in place, 24/7 just support overall. We do the monitoring and manage the backups and the disaster recovery of those servers and those backup devices. And we handle the third-party vendor support on behalf of the town. And not just Jim and myself, but literally Randy, Sam, whoever calls in, you have upwards of 135 engineers at your disposal, depending on the nature of the issue. It could be as simple as a support desk, help desk type person, or if it's a bigger server component, we can pull in network, security engineers and other people to assist in the matters that are coming. And again, the engineers are in all sorts of different categories, desktop, servers, virtualization, whatever's needed. For the hosted voice over IP, low upfront capital investment, this eliminate various hardware components in place, allows for 4-digit dialing between all sites. And for the most part, it's been pretty stable. The only thing that we've had to kind of deal with are the challenges is just dealing with Suddenlink and those type of connectivity issues and those type of things.
Which hasn't been too bad. We've only had the phone system go down maybe a handful of times since we got it. Makes you wonder if we had our regular old phone system, if it would have gone down, but I think with Suddenlink, when their internet goes down, so does their phone service. So you're in the same boat.
One of the other items as part of the overall was just VCIO duties, mine, and activities, as well as network as a service. We replaced all of the existing equipment with brand new equipment that is leased or owned by us. So it's no headaches on the town itself. It's our responsibility to manage, maintain. If it fails tomorrow, we have to come out and bring in a brand new piece of equipment, put it in and replace it for you. None of that comes back and falls on the town of Nashville. We've also used it to our advantage where switching from the network setup that we had at the Parks and Rec at the ballpark, we've shifted it just right over here to Bodie Street. And we actually have a few extra pieces of equipment that were not needed at the new site. That today I'll be working with Captain Winstead to go look at a new office location that he wants to put some undercover officers. And the plan is we'll probably reuse some of that network equipment from Parks and Rec and even Town Hall for that new location. And there will be very little to minimal new equipment that will be needed at that new location. And that's one of the kind of the beauties of this particular plan is you can use this equipment wherever you need to. If suddenly you no longer, you want to build a new police department or something, that equipment can be moved and brought over and still reused in the same capacities that it is today. Again, some of the things I mentioned before is, for you anyway, you never have to buy any network equipment again. The assets are VC3 owned. It's all on us to take care of the warranty, the replacing, repairing, and everything else, and the troubleshooting and keeping it alive and functioning. It's a set cost. It doesn't fluctuate. So, from the start, this is what it'll cost from month to month to month. And that is presented ahead of time. So there's no unknown costs of saying, why is it going up and down each month or anything like that. Basically, things that we're working on right now, as I said, Sam has been working with the financial vendor to migrate the existing financial application to the cloud, which is presently running off of the town hall server. which is physically it's old and outdated. So all we're waiting on is that to get migrated to the cloud in about 3 months or so. And then we'll replace that server and we'll virtualize it onto that new physical server. And they'll all be running out of the police department, which has the generator tied to the building. So again, less reliance on something in the town hall. So if power or something happens there, then the whole building and all those functions go down. Now we're trying to link things together with backup power, better backups, better disaster recovery, so that when things happen, unforeseen anything, there's little to no impact to the town. It can keep functioning, it can keep moving on and providing the critical services that it needs to. We're working towards getting cameras at Public Works, but on a larger scale that I need to chat with the captain as well as just trying to put together an overall camera strategy for the entire town. Instead of individual camera systems all over, trying to get them set up to where they can be monitored and maintained, preferably directly from the police department, and have it do the capabilities that the captain is wanting to do from both safety and legal protections. As I said, I'll be working with JT here in a little bit to go look at the new site where he'd like to put some undercover agents and what he'll need from a network standpoint there, as well as we've been working internally with the new equipment and reshuffling equipment to try to get much needed equipment over to the police for their body camera upcoming needs as well. Future plans, as I said, we're working towards an overall strategy just to install cameras at police, library, and parks of rec, and any other locations that are deemed necessary, and having them all tie in a proper fashion so they can be monitored and maintained well. Some of the next steps that we want to do that we couldn't do until we got Office 365 in place is set up email archiving for like FOIA requests and things like that to make it easier to manage and handle those requests when they come in, as well as just implement the additional managed security features that kind of tied into Office 365, or what we're seeing right now with the things that have happened, as you mentioned with Rocky Mountain. If people haven't been aware, about a month ago, the issue in Florida where the town's computer was hacked and they were able to get into the water system and adjust the levels and basically poison the water system. That was basically because it was on an old Windows 7 machine and happened to have, and it's a popular but an open source remote control tool still installed on the machine. So part of it was just lack of keeping it up, lack of removing certain tools that weren't needed afterwards. But it was very simple for them to get in, get the password, and get into the system. So some of the things that we're hoping to conquer in this upcoming fiscal period is we want to put in advanced endpoint protection. Our security officer has put together this software to enhance the security features on at the desktop level. Right now, the general consensus within the security industry is that the existing antivirus malware, typical things, McAfee, those type of things, just aren't enough to handle what's out there in the world, how they're coming in at us. Just when you think you're protected, they find a new way to sneak in and trick you into clicking on something or something else. To the point that this endpoint protection, for you guys, the agreement you signed, you have an unlimited agreement. So all our labor or costs that would to implement a new piece of software, something that's covered. So there's no cost to you. But for other folks, it isn't. This is such an important component coming out of our security group that they've stated that they were not even going to charge implementation costs till June of 2022 because of how critical they feel this is and with everything that's going on in the world right now. So advanced endpoint protection, web content, malware filtering, dark web monitor, and multi-factor authentication are the managed security components we would really want to try to get into the next fiscal period to help beef up your security and better protect you in that regards. Long term, possibly not this next fiscal year, but just things to consider is we've got the connections with Suddenlink, but to be polite, Suddenlink isn't always the most stable or the most friendly to work with. So one of the things we probably want to look at in the near future is a cellular failover. So if something were to happen with Suddenlink, it would trip over and go off cellular connection. It would not be as fast as Suddenlink, but it could at least allow critical functions to still happen and still maintain. So again, when these things happen or the outages come that are outside of your control and our control, we can provide you alternative paths to keep functioning and doing the work you need to do. We've always had on the radar is trying to position all the applications and everything and get you to the point where you can be more virtual, more mobile, especially with COVID and other things hitting us. We don't want to keep doing things the traditional way. We want to try to get you positioned to be as mobile and flexible as possible. So that's always, we're always working towards that goal as well. And of course, with Captain is just the needs from the police and additional body cameras and the things that he has in his vision, trying to incorporate that in as well. Any questions?
What would be the process if we were to be ransom software like the city of Rocky Mount? Where would we begin with that? All of our laptops are all in the system and boom, they're all now encrypted and we can't do anything with them.
Many ways to answer that because ransomware comes in different flavors and styles. So let's say something comes in, you click on something and
Well, the mayor wanted me to buy gift cards last week again.
That's right.
some of that is some
She
of the
did the same
managed
thing to
security
me.
components that we talked about is putting additional layers of security in there so that those type of things aren't coming to you. You don't see those. There's also a phishing simulator that we can put into place to help educate and train people. And trust me, this simulator is very sophisticated. It can make emails that will literally look like a Capital One page. It will be so close, I couldn't really even tell the difference. There's just subtle things you can go and look at or hover your mouse over, and then you'll see this long link, and it won't be anything closely related to like a Capital One link. So there's very subtle things that every time you think you've got it protected, they find a new way of getting around it and going further. So if a ransomware attack were to come in, let's say to your individual machine, most ransomware isn't like it's going to go out, hit every machine and lock it out. It would usually encrypt your own device. So one of the things that we're trying to do as we replace equipment, and even in an environment like Nashville where you're working on a physical device, is working towards getting all of your data stored up into the cloud or on the server. So that even if that gets ransomware, all we do is re-image it, set it up, reconnect you to your email, reconnect you to your data. So they encrypted it, but all of your data is over here. There should be no data kept locally, which means we could re-image you, get you stood back up and
Sure.
tied back to your data, and you can keep functioning. So again, we're trying to remove those traditional methods of like, here's my computer, I save everything here, and that's a fail point. Someone hits that, what do I do? All of them, everything, all my critical work, all my financial stuff, it was here. I have to pay the ransom. Or do you have a backup of my computer? Well, no, we don't, which is why best practice is to get it all up into the cloud and onto the server so you can remove those type of capabilities, or when they do things like that, it's less severe.
Sure.
And like I said, even if it is, oh, okay, we start over from scratch and we just reconnect you.
So are you saying that if you're working on your computer and you click on something that's ransomware, is it real time transferred to the cloud, or how often is it backed up to the cloud?
You're talking the computer itself or the data?
The data.
In most cases, depending on how people use their computers, which is something we can work with everyone too, is as I'm on a computer and I'm going in to open my files aren't really on the computer, they're on the server and I'm opening them or using them from there. And I do updates and they stay there. Or if they do, they'll come down and what they say, like a cached, they'll bring down a local copy. You're working on it. When you save it, it still saves it there, but performing. So that is local, as you're working it, but at the same time, then you hit save, it saves it back up to the server at the location. And again, that's just one example. There's many different ransomwares, many different malware attacks. So each one is slightly different. our whole goal is to try to take these steps to add additional layers of security, as well as, like I said, move you away from that traditional methodology, how stuff is saved, to the point where when those attacks come in, and they may, we can more quickly respond to them and get you back up and functioning, preferably not have you get hit at all. But if it happens like that, oh, okay, not a problem. Go to lunch. We'll re-image your machine. We'll have it back by this afternoon and have you back pointed to your stuff.
So
That's where we're at.
I know last year when we were talking about this, we had a ton of upgrades that we needed to do and a lot of security measures that we needed to take. So it was kind of going to be like a slow rollout of all we could do. Where do we stand right now with regard to like customer information, employee information, social security numbers, bank account numbers? Is that fully protected right now?
I can't answer that fully because there's too many things you've asked, and we could ask Sam. One of the things we're doing with the financial is moving that to the cloud.
Mhm.
So again, that data, even in the database protected right now, it's running off the town hall server. So it'd be on that server,
Mhm.
which presently is getting back to that backup device, and the next backup is going up to the cloud.
Okay.
So even if that server goes down, we can spin up that server on that backup device, keep functioning, no loss of financial data, and there's a backup copy.
Okay.
I can't remember what else you said, but it would depend on the particular application or your social security number. It depends where they're stored and whatnot for me to answer that appropriately.
Well, Katie mentioned our customers' bank account information.
In most cases, I guess I'd have to know a little bit more about how the financial application process.
There's nothing secure.
If that's stored
It's a secure file.
within the database.
Everything's.
Okay, so it's a secured file, probably encrypted on the database itself, on that server in the town hall presently. As they migrate to the cloud, there should be nothing left, or they should not be going to that local server anymore. It'll all be up in the financial vendor's cloud, which again is encrypted and backed up and everything else. Again, that's the goal we're trying to get to, is remove it away from these traditional methods so that multiple backups in multiple locations, so if something happens.
But we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. And COVID kind of threw us for a loop. We kind of had great, we've got a solid plan, and we had to go like this. But we've been able to accomplish quite a bit in that time frame, more than I thought we were going to be able to. So we really did a pretty good job for you over that last year.
What time frame are we looking at to hopefully have all the security that we are wanting in place?
It's really just a financial component now. I put together preliminary financial numbers for Sam to look over. We haven't had a chance to go over it yet because I just got them out there, I think, to her yesterday. They're there. Their line items are there and budgeted. It's just what we tackle it, and if the budget is there, we can begin spinning up projects and begin working on them in the next 3 to 4 months.
So Sam, how close are we?
Well,
How close are we?
we're close. We'll just have to discuss that when it comes time for the budget, because it would be a budget increase. to Add on some of these features.
It would be. Now, they're less expensive than some of the other items, but they're typical, it's an additional level of service. So in a lot of those, they're like an additional monthly cost. Where some of the other things we mentioned, like the video cameras, are more of a one-time cost, but they're also a bigger number. And we can look at different ways that maybe we can be creative in how we budget or how we charge for those items as well. Any other questions or anything else I can answer for you?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It'd be nice if people spend as much time doing good as they do bad.
I would like to now introduce you to Ms. Phyllis Pearson. She's our new auditor. She's been working for this year. She's done a lot of hard work for us. So these audit reports are hot off the press for you.
Please.
The two.
Really, one can have because,
Ghost, did you have to travel far to get here this morning?
No, it's about 30 minutes. Depending upon, how the traffic moves.
So you working in the Zebulon office then?
I live out in the eastern part of Wake County,
Okay.
just across the county line.
Oh, sure.
If you would like to follow along, pages, can everybody hear me? Do I need to take it off? Take it off so you can hear me. I don't have a lot of voice. Pages 7 and 8 and 9 are the independent auditors report.
We're missing Brenda for a moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can wait.
Just had to step out for a minute.
Be right back. Doing our audit for the first time, what's the most interesting thing you've learned about Nashville?
Okay,
right?
that you weren't taking inventory of your parts and supplies, which is really unusual because, if you have a utility fund, it's got inventory,
Mhm.
and that was a rather large asset.
But we have no accountability.
No accountability for it.
Hair sleeves, valves.
That's right. Yeah. And it was their first time counting it and figuring out what the value was.
Boy.
Yeah, just a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. There are a lot of transactions.
Yeah.
And a lot of transactions that the software and the way it posted made it overly complex. Yeah, that there were reconciliation procedures, particularly for utility billings, that if you put in place and your software works correctly, would give you correct balances every month, and that you have not been getting correct balances every month off of if you're using the printouts off the software without making changes to it. You made a very good decision in replacing that software.
Going with Edmonds.
Yes, going a different route because you can get better information out of an accounting system these days.
Okay.
Okay, 7, 8, and 9 is the independent auditors report. We, of course, audited the governmental activities, business type activities, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information, which is your smaller funds that combine together, and the related notes to the statements. Our responsibility is to take the underlying statements and examine the supporting documentation until we believe we have enough audit evidence to render an opinion. When we do that, we usually render an unmodified opinion. From time to time, we will have different opinions, but your opinion is an unmodified or clean opinion. The financial statements are fairly presented in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. Like all governmental in North Carolina, at least, statements, you have management's discussion and analysis and numerous pension schedules. We do not render an opinion on those documents. The pension schedules, the information to complete those are actually provided by the state auditor's office. And we simply make the journal entries to make that happen to your books. You can, in your utility funds, you can maintain accrual basis of accounting and record your own pension entries. In your general fund, you can't do that because it's modified accrual. It's a different basis of accounting. Usually most auditors post it in October. because the state auditor issued the information you need to do the work in September. That's the reality of that situation. Their budget to actual statements, this property tax statements, the schedule of expenditures of federal and state awards. Since this was a yellow book audit, we had to present that information, as well as the combining and individual fund statements for the non-major funds. The opinions on those schedules is unmodified, also because it is reconciles, and it's actually derived from the financial information you provided to us. We issued an opinion on your compliance with internal control over financial reporting and tested compliance with certain provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements, and something called other matters. Other matters is actually only addressed when you identify a situation where there's fraud. That's an unmodified or clean opinion. Since management's discussion on analysis includes what I'm going to go over when we start on page 22. Statement of net position, which is the full statements, meaning we recorded your capital assets and your long-term debt and the pension transactions. Under that basis of accounting, your total assets were $24 million. Your deferred outflows of resources was $659,000. Your total liabilities were $3 million. Total deferred inflows of resources, $195,000. And your net position is $21.4 million. Of that net position, there is roughly $600,000 that is restricted for certain activities, streets, sidewalks, projects, things of that nature. And the unrestricted amount is $6.3 million. On page 23, statement of activities. We spent $10.6 million, had $5.5 million in total charges for services. Most of that, $4.7 million and $722,000 came from your utility funds. Operating grants were $793,000. Had total general revenues of $4.3 million, transfers of $118,000 in the net total. And the change in net position was $75,000, leading to the net position at the end of the year of $21.4 million. The statements that you operate under, starting on page 24, this is the document you would use to make decisions. It's a modified accrual statement for your governmental funds. $6.8 million was your total assets, total liabilities, $304,000, total deferred inflows of resources, $167,000. Total fund balances is $6.3 million. Of that, $4.7 million is the unassigned general fund balance. So that's the money that is available for discretionary use. And it exceeds, the LGC at one point in time had a recommendation that it be 8% of prior expenditures. Now they're looking at higher numbers, somewhere between 30, 40%. So in either case, you meet that requirement. So it's in pretty good shape. In my opinion, they might differ. You have $973,000 that is assigned for capital projects and stabilization by state statute, $271,000 that's restricted, and for streets is $162,000 restricted.
So unassigned fund balance is
$4.7 million, yes, ma'am,
In general fund.
in the general fund. So that's a number you need in your planning. Page 25 is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. You had total revenues of $5.8 million. You spent $5.6 million. You had $182,000 in revenues over expenditures. Total other financing sources, $140,000. And then your revenues and expenditures after your other financing sources is $323,000, leading to the fund balance in total of $6.3 million. Page 26 is just a reconciliation between the full accrual and the modified accrual, and it shows you the items that are taken out or added back to arrive at full accrual accounting. Page 27 is the budget to actual statement. Most of your items, with the exception of capital outlay, are not over budget. I think the reason the capital outlay is over budget is because it's sitting up in probably public safety and needs to be moved down. In your budget, you don't isolate capital outlay. It's included in your departmental budget. And when we do this presentation, we have to make a modification, if you will, to that. Page 28 is the water and sewer fund. We had $10.3 million in total assets. Deferred outflows of resources, 86,000. Total current liabilities, 553,000. Total non-current, 414,000. Total deferred inflows of resources, 10,000. Total net position, 9.4 million. Of that, 1.6 million is unrestricted net position. This page, because utility funds are required to be full accrual, is the same as the previous page, so there's no reconciliation. Page 29 is a statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund net position. Total operating revenue is $4.7 million. Total operating expenses a little over $4 million. Operating income, $712,000. Non-operating revenue is a negative 1.2 million. And if you look at the grant projects number, the 1.2 million there, that is the reason. Those are old projects that had losses on them that were sitting in the software that should have been closed out in prior years. You didn't, there's a process. Once you finish a capital project, you don't let it sit there and not close it into the utility fund. So to get the fund balance correct, we made that adjustment. We tried doing it as a prior year adjustment, which generates a finding, but your cash flow statement will not balance if we do that, if we don't run it through revenues and expenses.
How old were those projects?
Those large budget amendments that
Yeah.
they were old.
72 and 73.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, they're old.
1.2.
And they're sitting there with a deficit fund balance. And you have to do something with it, and they should have been closed when the project ended. So that's what that is anyway.
Huge transfers that we had for last year.
72, you mean 1972 and
No,
1974?
Fund 72.
Oh, okay.
170 and 72.
Oh,
I didn't think it was that old.
Fund, sorry.
I thought you.
I wrote down
you said-
1972.
No,
So
fund.
Okay.
Like 2016.
2016. Okay, that makes me feel.
Okay,
It's just old stuff sitting there on the ledger for no particular reason.
So that's cleaned up.
That's cleaned up.
Okay.
That is a cleanup entry. That's a good word.
We've had a lot of fingers in the finance pot
Yes.
over the years.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Well, I just wanted you to know, you didn't overspend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Is the thing. It was just, it was out there, and if you combine your numbers, you have to collapse some of these funds into the utility funds, and that didn't work right. That was a bookkeeping problem from way back.
but previous auditors did not.
I think they've not already mentioned it. It just didn't there was no.
It just
follow-up.
didn't get done on the books, I think. You can't get back to the audit report fund balance without making this adjustment. Something or another was missed. And, that's all I can tell you. It was those two fund balances. And whenever, if your staff is not posting what the auditor does to the finance, the auditor's adjustments,
Then all you're doing
You end
is carrying it over.
you're just carrying it over. Oh, exactly. You understand perfectly. Yeah. And if I could, because the budget to action, the notes are very much the same as the prior year. I don't know, RS, what kind of detail would you like me to do? How detailed would you want me to be with the notes? Because you're just now seeing it. Most of the beginning pages of the notes are definitional. They describe the funds, how they operate, methods of accounting that we're using, modified accrual and full accrual.
This is page 33.
That's, yes, ma'am. And on to page 34. It goes on for 3 pages, I think. We talk about how you recognize revenue and expenses on the 2 different bases of accounting, 35. We talk about how the budgets are maintained. 36 is a description of each account. It starts because it goes through page 39, 40. It is a description of what each asset or liability is and what its purpose is. So we describe in detail that you have $442,000 on page 37 in restricted cash. And we describe what that is. As always, customer deposits for utilities is restricted cash because you have a legal obligation to pay it back to the customer. You have POW bill money of $162,000, sidewalk projects $39,000, and municipal service district $75,000. And you will note that these numbers reflect the restricted fund balance in the general fund, because once you restrict fund balance, you have to have an offsetting restricted asset, and I don't know that your prior year reports are done that way, because there's also a new accounting standard involved in reporting that way. Capital assets, we describe a capitalization policy. If this is not your capitalization policy, which might be the case, or you need to revise your capitalization policy, what you don't want to do is have small inventory items on the inventory listings. Things like computer printers that are small and localized and don't cost very much. You might consider revising this to reflect what you really, how you really want to operate for subsequent years. This is the policy as it was last year.
I was going to ask about the Gully Fire District tax. That's restricted.
Oh, yes, ma'am. The municipal service district.
Okay. The Gully Fire District, in the past years, it was unrestricted. It was deemed unrestricted. Sam, do you remember when I went to you with that?
I think we've got it. I'm looking on page. Saw it in here listed.
In
20.
Like it's that 584. That public safety number, that's why we do that. But it's basically a tax that we collect for the fire.
Okay,
What page was that?
it's under public safety.
23.
23 looks like it's in operating grants and contributions.
Okay,
Those are restricted funds.
yes, ma'am. If that operating grants and contributions column, anything that's in that column is restricted to a particular activity. Like transportation, that $145,000 is the money you receive from POW bill. So that these are all restricted monies.
For many years, they were deemed unrestricted in our budgets. Sam, do you remember that?
We treat it as restricted.
Would be restricted.
Because it can only be spent for a specific purpose.
Right, good.
Right, on page 40, it says restricted from municipal. That's for service, that's a piece of money that's restricted for servicing the downtown area. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the MSD money.
Yeah. On page 41, we started description of cash. You had a cash carrying amount of $966,000. That's meaning this reconciled cash balance, a bank balance of a little over $1 million. Of that, $250,000 is covered by federal depository insurance, and the remainder was held by collateral held under the pooling method, and you had $850 in petty cash. You had $7.3 million that's invested in the NCCMT, the Capital Management Fund. That's recorded at fair value, and we've disclosed that. Your credit risk is described related to those monies. It is obviously covered by the state in the pooling method as well. We describe your allowances for bad debts on your utility accounts on page 43. The general fund, there's $93,000 in taxes receivable that's been deemed to probably be uncollectible, and an allowance has been set up against the sanitation fee, $64,000, and against the water and sewer fund, $228,000 is the allowance for doubtful accounts. So that's been set up over time. There's a trend analysis that's done every year to determine what this number is, because you don't want to see big jumps or big falls in it unless you've got some collectible activity that actually went on. So these are estimates of the amounts that's recorded as receivable that might not be collectible. Page 43, it also has the capital assets for the general fund. And then page 44, the capital assets for the water and sewer fund. We have made a recommendation about the schedules related to, I believe, to the fixed asset records. They reflect some very, very small items. They don't reflect the capitalization schedule that's in the audit report, those policies properly. And that's why I wanted to bring up, you need to look at the policy and develop what your policy is going to be, and then adopt it, and then have the fixed asset records reworked to remove the things or that don't comply with the policy, or the things that no longer exist, because there's not been a physical inventory of the fixed assets done in years probably.
What page was that policy on? Do you remember?
Sure. It's page 37.
37.
See, it says that, let's see, furniture and equipment, if the item costs $5,000, capitalize it and depreciate it. But if you look at your schedule, you have items for $100, $200 on there that are being depreciated.
Where is our schedule? Is it in here?
No, it's
Something Sam has?
something Sam has. Yeah, it hasn't been managed.
So my desk that was given to the town by a bank 22 years ago is probably still in
It's
there.
probably,
Well, I can start also with, we really, what Ms. Phyllis is saying, we really just need to have a policy. We need to review it, have a good policy. I'm sure there are probably things that should be on there that aren't. So, once we have a policy, we'll have some method of follow through for those things.
Sam, what do you think of what Phyllis has here on page 37? Is that a good basis or a good start?
I mean, that's basically a standard practice in accounting.
Okay.
it's a standard practice. It looks like it was copied out of a template, this footnote.
Yeah.
It's kind of my thought. And if you take the actual policy and you sit down and you're trying to determine do these things comply, you take your actual schedules and you're trying to determine compliance with this policy, it doesn't work. There's just things, it needs a bit of work.
Okay.
But you've had bigger issues with the accounting system, like knowing that your billings are working right and your collections are working right. That it kind of, Sam's played catch up for a whole year. It's just the reality. The pension details, which covers from page 45. Heavens. It goes through. We are describing share of the liability the state has for state pension, for state government pension. If we look on page 46, your share if it were to be allocated actuarially, is a little over $1 million. It's $1,038,000. This is determined by looking at your monthly pension reports, the age of your population, how long they've been employed. And then they make a determination of what the liability is. And then it's prorated across every county, school system, town. There is, if you have somebody participating in the plan and you receive back your share. This is paid for every payroll period when you make the contribution to the plan. And those contributions adjust this up and down every year. The state uses Bucking Consultants, which is a highly respected actuarial firm, as well as their own, state auditor has its own pension division. And they work in tandem. One does the first calculations and one checks it, so that the stuff is it's highly correct in that sense. So you're not looking, what I'm getting at is you're not looking at a bunch of future payments because you're handling it through payroll. Okay. And then you have the same thing on page 49, law enforcement officer special separation allowance. The obligation is $80,000. That the real reason is short-term employees, younger employees. That brings that liability down and is paid for every month when you make the law enforcement officer's contribution to the plan. And you also have a supplemental income plan, which is a defined contribution plan. You made $32,000 in contributions to that plan during the year. There's no, page 52, there's no continuing liability. That is, it works something similar to a 401k. The employees own it and they vest in the contributions and receive it when they retire if they meet the vesting requirements. On page 53, we started discussion of the post-employment benefits, for instance, healthcare benefits you're going to supply to certain employees that meet the eligibility requirements. The obligation for those, that liability is $752,000. It has not been updated since 2019 because the study wasn't redone. You can, the study has to be done every 3 years. So you're coming up that you're going to have one due. So that's why those numbers are kind of strange. And then we have on page 56, showing you the deferred outflows and inflows of resources. And what that really means is there's funds set aside, deferred outflows that are going to be used for the future. The contributions you're making for the pension plan are going to be used for future payments of the liability. And deferred inflows means the reverse. They're assumptions and changes that are going to be used in the current period, meaning 2021. On page 57, we started discussion of your installment purchases. You really don't have much in the way of installment debt. You have $151,000 in a direct borrowing agreement that you owe. And then you have an installment purchase agreement that you owe $19,800 on. You have a legal debt margin, meaning the amount you could borrow if you wanted to of $33.8 million. And hopefully you don't want to do that. Page 59 shows you the transfers back and forth and discusses and explains that the reason you transfer money is to supply funds for operating purposes. I've discussed the fund balance. And then you have continuing obligations under various leases on page 60. There is a comment about the COVID situation because we cannot make any determination monetarily about what's going to happen as a result of COVID. The next schedules that follow are the budget actual schedules. If we looked at page 85. I'd just like to, this is the discussion of your ad valorem taxes. You are owed the net realizable amount, $74,000 at the end of the year. You're due that. On page 86, your correction percentages for the total levy was 98.21%. For real property, 97.96%. And then, of course, for motor vehicles, 100%. So those are good numbers. Yellow Book opinion, which is unmodified, meaning that it's a clean audit opinion, dollars, and that's because you received more than $100,000 in funding from state and federal sources. You had no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies or non-compliance material to those financial statements, is what this letter says on 88 to 89. As summarized on page 90. Your findings from the prior year, when budget expenditures exceeded budget appropriations, and there were significant reconciliations, we considered those resolved.
93.
93. On Samantha worked really hard on a lot of reconciliations when we would identify that something needed to be done. So that kind of resolved that problem, was the work the staff did, because they didn't leave that to us to do. And then the budget problem is just how you manage your budget. So that's resolved. The scheduled expenditures of federal and state awards. It shows that you had a total of $356,000. It came from various sources. And it's just a report to the state of North Carolina. It won't go to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse because your total federal awards were $37,000. And that number would have to be $750 for that to be the outcome. And the management letter, which is the one-page letter, and I've discussed the fixed asset issue. The records really need work, and to keep up the good work your staff did in getting us inventory information, because they started from zero and they really did come up with accountable inventory with prices. Utility receivables and revenues that are recorded in the general ledger should be reconciled to the billing journals and other records monthly. Meaning that you should, if you make an adjustment to utilities, we should have a general journal that has a general, description of what and supporting documentation for what you're changing. There should be oversight, that somebody review it and sign off on it, and that the amounts that the system posts each month to the utility revenues and receivables is correct. It should be the same numbers. And when we started working on these things, utility fund showed a receivable of $1.2 million. And that number was 300 and something, I believe is right. So it took a lot of work to figure out where the errors were at. Let's see. That's what I'm getting at. The net receivable is $252,000. And so that situation should not exist. It's one of the high-risk areas in any municipality is where they collect cash. That's where you're most likely to have an embezzlement occur. The way you get around that is having, the way you reduce your risk, as I should say, because you can't completely eliminate people's behavior, is to have in place a good system where there's a timely reconciliation every month of your revenues and receivables related to the, so you know what you billed and what you collected, and then does your cash reconcile. If you do those two things consistently, it reduces your risk of theft of money considerably. That's why you want to do it.
Do we have enough checks and balances?
I think you're developing them. What I looked at initially and where you are now shows substantial improvement. But the year we audited, most of the staff that you have weren't here. And it wasn't constructed quite the way it is now. So you need to keep working on it, but I think you've made progress. Okay, accounts receivable, taxes and utility receivables should be reviewed periodically, and amounts due from customers should be written off the books if deemed uncollectible. And once you write them off the books, you should also turn them over to the state for debt set in the debt set-off program so that the state can pursue and collect, because if, when somebody applies for a mortgage, or, there's outstanding debt there, you have a good chance of collecting it. So you would get a little money that way and recover some of it. All accounting staff members should be trained in the use of the accounting software so that you're not in a critical situation where one person knows how to do this particular function and nobody else does, and that person's out of work. You want to have your operation so that it operates effectively every day, regardless of what's going on with staff. So you need what's called cross-training, but that needs to happen with the new accounting software. And then one recommendation, and because I think it makes the accounting easier, is that to set up a stormwater fund and track the revenues and expenses and assets of that activity, liabilities. Separate. No, that's your option. I don't think there's a statutory requirement, but I think it would make the bookkeeping easier.
Where do we have them right now? Just
In the
general fund?
That's, your general fund's sort of,
Mhm.
if it doesn't go in water sewer, it's right here in the general fund. It's sort of the way was run in the old software.
Okay, John.
For debt,
I'm
sorry.
reading the one-page letter.
I said that's a catch-all.
Yes, ma'am, you got it. Sorry, I misunderstood. Mass make it really
Yes.
hard.
For the debt set off for individuals with taxes, overdue taxes, is there a minimum amount that you would transfer to the state?
Well, you have to develop your policy, what you're willing to, what do you want to do?
What we're willing to absorb and then,
Right,
okay,
because like really small ones might not be worth the trouble.
right, okay.
Everything that's delinquent gets sent to debt set off, everything that we've got. Anything that's eligible. It has to be $50 or above.
That was my question.
Yeah, the $50.
But it's everything that we can send, we do. We can't send anything that's business related, like corporate, or even most LLC stuff we can't do. You have to have a valid social. I'll discuss this later, but I'm working on making sure that we can being able to get tools to give us the information that we need. I mean, because you have to have correct information even to get it.
Yeah.
And it's not always as a fit. I mean, it takes a while to get your money if you have to.
Okay, any more questions?
I just want to say I appreciate it.
Very much.
This is a well-written, I think, report that I can understand, and I appreciate it.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate us?
Taking too long to answer that question.
No, I've never been asked that question. I've been asked the question, do we get an A, B, or C? Then, I think you're up maybe in the higher part, like maybe a 7 or 8, but you've got some issues to work out with it. And I know you're already on that track. I'm expecting this next time with the new software to be easier, we hope.
Plus, we have a good, competent person that
Right.
help us and lead us.
And she's got a good understanding of internal controls and checks and balances.
And the evaluation that you were making just then, Phyllis, you're talking about the accounting systems and the reporting. You're not talking about our financial position.
No, ma'am.
You're talking strictly about.
Yes, we do not do personnel
Right.
evaluation.
Exactly.
It's really about the system and the way the
Exactly.
system works. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so financial position, we're very good, would you say?
Well, I didn't have any experience with your prior financial people.
Good.
Well, some of the printouts I poured over, I would agree. But no, we didn't have any problems with your staff. Okay.
No, I think she's talking our actual financial
Financial
position.
position.
As a
She's-
town
She's
financially, how
asking
are we?
financially.
Balance or,
They
yes.
say your mask.
Right. No, you're in good financial shape and you're not in debt over your head.
Yeah.
You can actually make your debt service payments, and that's not often the case. You made good decisions in that sense.
thing we're doing, we'll make the state want to come in and look at it more. We have to
No,
go
I
to
don't think
jail.
the state's,
Or take us
they've got
over.
bigger problems.
Right, take us over,
Yeah.
or send us to jail.
No,
I don't need one of them.
no,
Our bigger,
don't look good in orange. jumpsuit.
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Phyllis. Great.
Appreciate it. Well, if you guys want to take a break for
That would be nice.
10
Did you
minutes.
turn the air up? I mean, so it's not so cold in here?
Yes.
I was kind
If
of,
we don't die of the virus, we will of pneumonia.
Well, I thought it would be more responsive at bringing the heat up than it has been, but I got it set at 73 now, so.